The Hall of Mirrors on Zira Prime was not made for humans. The alien king knew that. The ceiling arched so high it dissolved into darkness, lined with living crystal that reflected every shape into 1,000 warped copies. The air shimmered with faint radiation meant to keep lesser species docile. At the center of the chamber, on a throne grown from bioluminescent stone, sat King Valefor of the Carrick's dominion, his massive form draped in ceremonial plating, mandibles clicking softly in amusement as he studied the lone human standing at the foot of the throne. The human was smaller than even the weakest of Valefor's warriors, wrapped in a simple pressure suit, helmet removed, face exposed to the alien atmosphere that stung the lungs with each breath. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien nobles watched, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was not a negotiation. This was a spectacle. Valefor raised one clawed limb, and the chamber fell silent. He spoke in a voice that reverberated through the crystals, translated instantly by the implants woven into the walls. Humanity, he declared, was an anomaly that had survived too long by luck alone. Their ships were crude, their weapons primitive compared to Dominion technology. They scavenged, adapted, and multiplied like vermin. They had been tolerated as curiosities, as minor traders on the fringe of civilized space. Now they had overstepped. They had refused tribute. They had attacked a Dominion patrol. They had dared to speak of sovereignty. The court rippled with laughter as Valefor listed human failings with surgical precision. He described their wars, their internal divisions, their fragile bodies that broke under conditions the Carricks considered mild. He mocked their emotional attachments, their tendency to sacrifice for one another, calling it a weakness that would be their extinction. He leaned forward on his throne, towering, and announced that today would be remembered as the moment humanity was formally humbled before the Dominion, reduced to vassalage or erased. The human envoy did not move. His name was Elias Ward, a former engineer turned diplomat by necessity, selected not because he was powerful, but because he had volunteered when no one else would. He listened without interruption, his jaw set, his eyes steady. When Valefor finally finished, the king flicked his claws in a gesture of dismissal, as if expecting the human to beg, to plead, to bargain for scraps of mercy. The translator chimed softly, inviting the human to speak. The chamber leaned in. The alien nobles expected fear. They expected desperation. Elias took one slow breath, feeling the alien air burn, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs, thinking of the colonies that would burn if he failed, of the families on distant worlds who would never even know his name. Then he spoke only 2 words. Try me. The translator rendered the phrase, and for a heartbeat, the chamber was silent. Then the laughter erupted. It rolled through the hall like thunder, nobles clutching their carapaces, mandibles clattering in delight at the absurd bravado of a lone human daring the Dominion's king. Valefor's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in curiosity. He descended from his throne, each step sending vibrations through the living stone. He circled Elias slowly, studying the fragile creature who had just challenged an empire with 2 simple words. The king gestured, and a holographic display flared to life, showing Dominion fleets, planet crackers, armies bred for conquest. He described in detail the number of human worlds already marked for annihilation, the simulations of Earth's oceans boiling under orbital fire, the calculated extinction of human culture within a single generation. He asked the human what exactly he thought could stop such inevitability. Elias met the king's gaze. He did not list fleets. He did not boast of weapons. He spoke of people. He spoke of miners who had turned drilling rigs into rail cannons when pirates came. He spoke of farmers who had wired their tractors into makeshift armor when raiders burned their fields. He spoke of medics who treated enemies and allies alike, because humanity refused to become what it fought. The nobles scoffed. Valefor clicked his mandibles, amused. Stories, he said, did not win wars. Numbers did. Technology did. Fear did. Elias smiled faintly. He said humans were very good at being underestimated. Valefor ordered a demonstration. He commanded his guards to bring forth a captive human taken from a skirmish on the frontier. The prisoner was dragged into the light, bruised, bleeding, barely conscious. Valefor explained that this human would be executed as an example of Dominion mercy's limits. He invited Elias to watch, to see what defiance earned. Elias stepped forward. The guards tensed, weapons aimed. But Valefor raised a claw, intrigued. Elias knelt beside the prisoner, whispered something inaudible, and then stood again. He did not beg. He did not rage. He simply repeated, quietly this time, "Try me." The execution did not proceed. Instead, alarms wailed through the hall as an aide rushed forward, broadcasting urgent reports. A Dominion outpost on the edge of human space had gone dark. Communications lost. Valefor snarled, dismissing it as coincidence, ordering confirmation. More reports flooded in. Patrol ships ambushed. Supply routes disrupted. The nobles murmured uneasily. Elias said nothing. He did not need to. The Dominion had assumed humanity's refusal to submit was posturing. They had not considered that the human envoy before them might be buying time. Valefor realized, with a flicker of irritation, that this lone human had come not to negotiate surrender, but to announce a war already in motion. He demanded to know what humanity had done. Elias replied, the humans were very bad at fighting fair when extinction was on the line. Valefor ordered Elias seized. Guards lunged, but the floor beneath them erupted as concealed charges detonated, throwing alien bodies into the crystal walls. The hall shook. Elias had not come alone. Embedded human operatives, smuggled in as servants and traders, triggered their devices in perfect synchrony. The mirrors cracked, the living crystals screaming as structural integrity failed. Smoke filled the chamber. Valefor roared in fury, realizing too late that the spectacle he had arranged had become a battlefield. Elias ran as the chamber collapsed behind him, alarms shrieking, nobles scattering in panic. He did not look back. He did not need to. The message had been delivered. Humanity would not kneel quietly. The Dominion would learn that mockery was a dangerous way to begin a war. The corridors of Zira Prime burned with red emergency light as Elias Ward sprinted through smoke and falling debris. The palace was no longer a place of ceremony, but a living trap. Its organic walls convulsing as internal systems fought to contain the damage. The Dominion guards were trained for battle, but they were trained for order, for clean engagements and predictable resistance. What they faced now was chaos, planted deliberately. Elias slid around a corner as a plasma bolt scorched the wall where his head had been a second earlier. He didn't fire back. He didn't need to. His job was not to win a firefight in the heart of the Carrick's Dominion. His job was to escape alive long enough for the war to begin on humanity's terms. In his ear, a whisper of static resolved into the calm voice of Commander Rhea Solis, speaking from a stealth frigate hidden beyond the planet's sensor veil. She told him the extraction window was collapsing. Dominion fleets were scrambling. The palace shields were reconfiguring. He told her he was aware, then vaulted over a fallen pillar and disappeared into a service conduit barely wide enough for his shoulders. Behind him, alien claws scraped against metal as guards pursued, their hissing breaths echoing through the tunnel. He triggered a compact charge behind him, collapsing the passage and buying himself seconds that felt like hours. Those seconds were enough. He burst into an open hangar bay, its ceiling cracked open to the black of space, emergency force fields flickering as docked vessels burned. A human stealth shuttle shimmered into visibility, its hull rippling as active camouflage disengaged. Elias ran as the ramp dropped, leaping aboard as plasma fire stitched the air around him. The ramp sealed. The shuttle lurched, engines screaming as it punched through the failing force field and vanished into the void. On the bridge of the stealth frigate, Rhea exhaled as Elias's biosignature stabilized. She watched the tactical display fill with red as Dominion response fleets erupted from hyperspace around Zira Prime. This was only the opening move. Across human space, the quiet preparation of years snapped into open war. Merchant convoys that had once traded under Dominion shadow scattered, some revealing concealed weapon pods, others self-destructing to deny capture. Frontier colonies activated planetary shields built from repurposed mining arrays, ugly, inefficient, and terrifyingly effective. Human ships did not line up in noble formations. They vanished into asteroid fields, lurked in the gravity wells of gas giants, and struck where Dominion sensors were weakest. The first Dominion task force sent to punish a border colony found nothing waiting for them but silence. Then their escorts began to disappear, one by one, ripped apart by kinetic kill vehicles launched from nowhere. Panic rippled through Dominion command channels as reports contradicted doctrine. The humans did not engage directly. They cut supply lines, sabotaged relay stations, poisoned fuel stocks with nanite contaminants that corroded reactors from the inside. Dominion technology was advanced, elegant, optimized for dominance over lesser foes. It was not optimized for an enemy that treated war like a series of dirty tricks, chained together by desperation and ingenuity. On Earth, long declared a backwater by the Dominion, defense grids powered up that no alien intelligence had ever fully catalogued. They were patchwork systems, stitched together from generations of human improvisation. Old orbital platforms originally designed to track asteroids now hurled tungsten slugs at relativistic speeds. Civilian freighters, their holds gutted and replaced with missile racks, slipped out of dockyards under the cover of civilian traffic, becoming wolves among sheep. The Dominion answered with overwhelming force. Planet crackers moved into position around human fringe worlds, their colossal beams charging to boil atmospheres and shatter crusts. On the colony of Havelock, the sky turned white as the first beam fired. The beam faltered, not because the Dominion lacked power, but because human engineers had done something profoundly reckless. They had laced the planet's upper atmosphere with conductive aerosols seeded from weather control drones, turning the sky itself into a chaotic lens. The beam scattered, its energy diffusing into a storm of ionized fire that cooked the Dominion fleet's own escorts as much as the planet below. Havelock burned, cities lost, millions dead, but the planet did not crack. The message was clear. Humanity would pay in blood, but not in submission. On Zira Prime, King Veilthor watched the unfolding disaster from a command spire hastily converted into a war room. His nobles demanded decisive annihilation. His generals demanded time to adapt. Veilthor felt something unfamiliar coil in his core. Not fear, but irritation at having misjudged prey. The human envoy's 2 words echoed in his thoughts. Try me. He had thought it bravado. He saw now it had been a warning. Dominion fleets were powerful, but power bred patterns. And patterns were something humans excelled at breaking. Reports came in of Dominion soldiers captured on fringe worlds, treated for wounds, and released with warnings to carry back. This confused Dominion strategists more than any ambush. Why spare enemies? Why waste resources on mercy? The answer spread among human forces like a quiet creed. Because every spared enemy was a story. Every story undermined the image of the Dominion as inevitable. The war ground on in brutal asymmetry. Dominion worlds were not immune. Human strike teams slipped through defenses once thought impenetrable, sabotaging shipyards, seeding doubt among subject species who had lived under Dominion rule for centuries. Whispers of rebellion flared. The Dominion was no longer the unchallenged center of gravity in known space. It was bleeding, slowly. In 1,000 places it had never bothered to defend properly, because it had never believed it would need to. On the bridge of the stealth frigate, Elias watched the stars streak by as humanity burned and fought and endured. He did not feel victorious. He felt tired. But beneath the exhaustion was a grim certainty. The alien king had asked what could stop inevitability. The answer was not fleets or weapons alone. It was the refusal to accept the story the Dominion told about the universe. Humanity had always been small, always been mocked, always been told to stay in its place. The war had begun because a king laughed and a human said 2 words. The galaxy would spend generations learning what those words truly meant. The war did not end in a single decisive battle, because humanity did not believe in endings that came clean. It ended in exhaustion, in the slow grinding down of certainty on both sides, in the realization that dominance was not the same as control. Years passed, measured not by calendars, but by the scars carved into worlds. Dominion fleets still burned human colonies, and human strike groups still gutted Dominion shipyards. But the rhythm of conquest that had once defined the Carrick's Dominion began to stutter. Their logistics faltered as subject species quietly withdrew support, delayed shipments, misreported production, and leaked routes to human raiders. Valefor felt the empire slipping, not through dramatic defeats, but through the erosion of obedience. He convened councils that grew more fractious by the cycle. Nobles accusing generals, generals accusing scientists, all of them haunted by the idea that a species they had dismissed as vermin had taught the galaxy to resist inevitability. On the human side, victory did not look like triumph. Earth's skies bore the scars of orbital fire. Entire constellations of colonies went dark, their populations scattered or dead. Children grew up in transit habitats, learning star maps before they learned to write. Humanity adapted because it had no choice. The war reshaped culture as much as territory. Old divisions lost meaning when survival demanded cooperation across ideologies and origins. The same improvisational madness that had turned mining rigs into cannons now turned refugee ships into mobile academies and hospitals, preserving knowledge while cities burned. Elias Ward became a symbol he never wanted to be. Recordings of his 2 words circulated across human networks, stripped of context and transformed into slogans painted on hulls and whispered before raids. Try me became less a taunt and more a vow. He spent the years moving between shattered worlds and hidden outposts, speaking to commanders, engineers, civilians who asked him what he had meant in that hall of mirrors. He told them he had meant nothing heroic. He had been tired of being laughed at. The simplicity of that answer unsettled people more than any grand speech. In the Dominion core, Valefor aged. Carricks lived long lives, but stress carved its own timeline into his carapace. He ordered adaptations, new doctrines, countermeasures against human unpredictability. The Dominion learned to decentralize, to camouflage supply lines, to expect betrayal from subject species. But every adaptation conceded a truth the Dominion had once denied. They were no longer fighting prey. They were fighting peers in will, if not in technology. The war reached a breaking point, not with the destruction of a world, but with the failure of an ultimatum. Valefor transmitted a final demand to Earth, offering cessation of planet cracking in exchange for formal submission and disarmament. The human response was not a fleet. It was a broadcast. Millions of human voices, from soldiers in foxholes to children in orbiting habitats, speaking in different languages, saying variations of the same 2 words. The transmission did not threaten. It did not boast. It simply refused. The galaxy listened. Subject species who had lived under Dominion banners for generations heard in that refusal the possibility of choosing differently. Rebellions flared openly now, not as whispers, Dominion fleets were forced to turn inward, fighting fires across their own territories. The empire that had once seemed eternal fractured into contested regions, still powerful, still dangerous, but no longer singular. Veilthor watched reports of worlds declaring independence, of governors defecting, of fleets refusing orders. He remembered the human envoy, standing small in the Hall of Mirrors, unarmed, unbowed. Mockery had been easy when power felt absolute. He understood too late that absolute power was a story the Dominion told itself. When that story cracked, everything built on it trembled. The final meeting between Veilthor and Elias did not take place in a throne hall. It took place in orbit over a dead world, a neutral station assembled hastily by species who had decided the war needed an end that did not involve extinction. Veilthor's image flickered across a hollow emitter, his once imposing presence diminished by projection and years of attrition. Elias looked older too, lines etched into his face by loss. They did not trade insults, they did not posture. Veilthor acknowledged that the Dominion could continue the war for generations, burning human worlds until nothing remained. Elias acknowledged that humans would continue to fight even if nothing remained to save. The stalemate was not born of balance of power, but of balance of ruin. They negotiated terms that satisfied no one fully. The Dominion withdrew planet crackers from human core systems. Humanity recognized the Dominion's remaining territories and ceased deep strikes into the core. Borders were redrawn in smoke and compromise. The war did not end hatred, but it ended the certainty that one side would erase the other. When the accord was signed, Elias did not feel relief. He felt a quiet, aching hope that the galaxy might learn faster than it had. Veilthor ended the transmission with a question he had carried for years. Why had the humans said those two words, knowing the risk? Elias answered honestly, because sometimes the only way to change the story someone tells about you is to dare them to prove it. The connection cut. The war receded into memory, not as a clean victory, but as a lesson written in ruined worlds and stubborn survival. Humanity did not become rulers of the galaxy. They became something more dangerous to tyrants. They became proof that being small did not mean being silent, that being mocked did not mean being broken, and that sometimes the most terrifying words an empire could hear were not a declaration of power, but an invitation to be tested. The war had ended, but the silence it left behind was louder than any battle. In the border systems between human space and the fractured remnants of the Dominion, trade lanes reopened under the watch of uneasy patrols. Wreckage still drifted in long, glittering belts around dead worlds, and scavenger crews picked through the bones of fleets that had once promised inevitable victory. Humanity rebuilt with the same stubborn creativity it had used to survive. Stations were grown from salvaged hulls, cities layered atop ruins, defenses woven into civilian infrastructure because no one trusted peace to last. Elias Ward did not retire into obscurity. He tried. He settled on a half-terraforming world where the sky was always the color of rust, hoping anonymity would dull the memories. It did not. The galaxy had learned his name, and names have gravity. When the first whispers reached him, he ignored them. Reports of ships vanishing along the old Dominion frontier. Patrols finding debris fields, stripped with surgical precision. Not the chaotic wreckage of pirates or rebels. Human commanders dismissed it as post-war lawlessness. Elias felt the old tension return. The sense that something patient was moving in the dark. He left his rust-colored sky and boarded a courier ship headed for the frontier, carrying nothing but a travel pack, and the quiet understanding that peace never ended wars. It only changed their shape. The first colony he visited was a listening post built into the hollowed shell of a Dominion cruiser. The settlers there spoke of shadows that bent light, of sensors that went blind for heartbeats at a time. of distress calls that lured patrols into ambushes, where nothing was found but empty space and echoes of scrambled transmissions. Elias listened and said little. He had learned that panic traveled faster than truth. He asked for raw data, for sensor logs, for the stories people told when they were sure no one important was listening. Patterns emerged. The disappearances formed a spiral around a region of space the Dominion had once sealed off as forbidden, even to its own fleets. The reason for the quarantine had never been recorded in Dominion archives recovered by humans. Entire data vaults were missing, as if someone had carefully erased a chapter of Imperial history. Elias took a small human scout ship and crossed into the forbidden region, with a crew of volunteers who had survived the war and did not fear adding new nightmares to the old. Space there felt wrong. Stars were dimmed by veils of particulate matter, but sensors could not classify. Gravity wells rippled subtly, like water disturbed by something moving beneath the surface. The crew joked to keep steady, but their laughter died as instruments failed one by one, not catastrophically, but politely, as if systems were being turned off by an unseen hand. They found the first derelict drifting near a dead star. It was not Dominion. It was older. Its hull was carved with patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. Fractal grooves that seemed to rearrange themselves when not looked at directly. The ship bore no obvious weapons, but the space around it felt crowded, as if something vast pressed close without touching. The crew boarded. Inside, the corridors were smooth and seamless, grown rather than built. The air was breathable, maintained by systems that still hummed after centuries or millennia of abandonment. In the central chamber, they found a sphere suspended in a lattice of dark metal, its surface rippling with faint light. As Elias approached, the sphere pulsed, and the scout ship outside went silent. The crew's implants filled with static, then with a voice that was not sound but pressure, not words but intent. The thing in the sphere was not a machine. It was an archive of a species the Dominion had once encountered and chosen not to conquer, not because it could not, but because the cost had been deemed existential. The archive spoke of entities that did not build empires, but gardens of influence, seeding regions of space with self-propagating intelligence that learned its enemies and adapted faster than doctrine could evolve. The Dominion had sealed this region and erased it from memory, to prevent panic and to buy time they had never used well. The garden had not died. It had been waiting. Humanity's war, its explosions and disruptions, had stirred the soil of that garden. The disappearances were not raids. They were harvests of data, of behavior, of tactics. The archive offered no threats. It offered a mirror. It showed Elias projections of futures where humanity faced an enemy that did not mock, did not posture, did not underestimate. An enemy that learned from every encounter and grew quieter as it grew stronger. The crew argued in whispers about retreat, about destroying the derelict, about warning human command. Elias felt the familiar weight of a choice no one wanted. He asked the archive a single question, the same one he had asked a king in a hall of mirrors. What happens if we try you? The sphere pulsed again, and this time the intent carried something like curiosity. The sphere's light dimmed, not in retreat, but in consideration, as if the concept of being tried was a novelty worth examining. The pressure in Elias's skull eased just enough for thought to return. The archive did not answer in words. Instead, the chamber filled with images layered directly into the crew's perception. They saw ancient battlefields, where fleets moved like schools of fish, reacting as a single organism to threats that shifted too fast for centralized command. They saw worlds wrapped in lattices of living structures that grew defenses in response to impact, healing breaches before attackers could exploit them. They saw civilizations that had once believed in overwhelming force, reduced to static patterns in the garden's expanding web. The message was not a threat. It was a demonstration of process. The archive conveyed that the Garden did not seek conquest for territory or tribute. It sought information. Conflict was simply a rich source of learning. The Dominion had fought it once, briefly, long enough to realize that every tactic taught the Garden how to counter the next. The quarantine had been an act of fear masquerading as strategy. Elias felt the familiar human urge to turn this into a challenge, to frame the unknown as an enemy to be beaten. He resisted it. He asked what the Garden wanted now. The response was a sensation of openness, an invitation that was not benign. The Garden had been dormant by choice, conserving itself. Humanity's war had reintroduced noise into its region of space, disturbances that signaled the presence of adaptable minds. The Garden wished to learn from this new variable. It would observe, sample, and adjust. The disappearances would continue. Human commanders would interpret them as attacks and respond. Each response would feed the Garden's models. The cycle would accelerate, until either humanity withdrew from the region entirely, or became something the Garden could not easily categorize. The crew's pilots swore under her breath. Withdrawal would mean abandoning frontier colonies, conceding space hard-won in blood. Engagement would mean teaching an enemy how to kill humans better. Elias saw the trap clearly. This was not a war of annihilation yet. It was a war of understanding, and the Garden had centuries of patience. He ordered the crew back to the scout ship. The archive did not resist. It did not attempt to detain them. It recorded their departure with the same neutral curiosity it had recorded their arrival. Outside, systems came back online as if nothing had happened. The Dead Star loomed, indifferent. As they jumped out of the Forbidden Region, Elias transmitted everything to Human Command, and to the loose coalition of former Dominion subjects who now shared intelligence. The response was chaos. Some leaders demanded immediate strikes, arguing that a dormant threat was still a threat. Others urged secrecy, fearing panic would fracture the fragile peace. Frontier governors begged for reinforcements. Militaries dusted off planet cracker schematics, then shelved them again, haunted by memories of escalation. Elias argued for something that sounded insane even to him. He argued that humanity should not engage the Garden
in its own domain of adaptation.
Humans were good at chaos, at breaking patterns, at refusing to play the game an enemy expected. The Garden learned through conflict, because conflict was structured, measurable, iterative. What it did not know how to model was irrational mercy, misdirection layered on misdirection, and cooperation across species that had once been enemies. He proposed opening channels with former Dominion client species along the frontier, building mixed patrols whose tactics shifted, not by doctrine, but by shared improvisation. He proposed seeding false patterns deliberately, staging feints that led nowhere, withdrawing from battles humans could win to teach the Garden bad lessons. The council chambers across human space erupted in debate. Some called it reckless.
Some called it cowardly.
Survivors of burned worlds wanted something to shoot. Elias did not pretend his plan would save everyone. He said only that teaching an adaptive enemy clean lessons was the fastest way to lose. The first test came sooner than anyone expected. A joint patrol of human and Carrick's defectors vanished near the edge of the Forbidden Region. Wreckage appeared hours later, arranged in a slow spiral around an invisible center. The pattern was almost beautiful. Human fleets surged toward the region in anger. Elias urged restraint. He convinced a small task group to try something different. They approached the spiral and then retreated abruptly, broadcasting conflicting distress signals that overlapped and contradicted each other, staging the illusion of panic and disarray. They left behind drones broadcasting fragments of Dominion and human tactical chatter spliced together into nonsense. The Garden responded. The space around the spiral shifted as unseen processes adapted to what it perceived as erratic prey behavior. The task group jumped away, leaving behind nothing to harvest but noise. It was not a victory. It was a question mark. The garden learned something that day, but not what it wanted. Elias watched the data and felt a cautious, fragile hope. Humanity could not outgun an enemy that learned faster with every clean exchange. But humanity had always been very good at being messy.